Hello, in this video I thought I'd take a little time here and let's talk about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. It's very important in quilting to have a 1/4 inch seam because that way all of our pieces line up how they're supposed to be and that our block would come out the size that we want it to be. And it's also very important that we're consistent throughout the process. So I have an index card here, and on this index card these lines are 1/4 inch apart. So if I take my ruler and I'm going to put it on that red line there where the 1/4 inch line is, and then I can see that blue line is right at the tip of my ruler and it's a 1/4 inch. So one thing I'm going to do to practice is I'm going to take that index card and I'm going to line it up so that I can stitch right along a solid line. Okay, and so you can do this with thread in your machine or without thread in your machine. Okay, and as I'm stitching right on that line, I can see where the edge of my foot is in relation to this line. That would be my 1/4 inch seam. So this foot, if you can see, is just a little bit shy of getting right on that 1/4 inch line. So if I was going to put the edge of this presser foot along this line, my needle would not hit on this line. So I'm going to go ahead and trim this. So there is where my needle was stitching and I saw that my foot did not quite come to that line. Now this time I'm going to put the edge of my presser foot right along the edge of that line, and I'm going to follow the line with the edge of my presser foot right here. Okay, and it's a little bit harder to do that. I'm not used to doing that, but here you can see then that my stitches are just shy of that line. So this foot here then would be a good scant 1/4 inch. If I was going to line the edge of my fabric right along up the side of this presser foot here, I would have a very nice scant 1/4 inch. Okay, so that kind of helps us understand where our needle is in relation to the foot that we have on our machine. Now they do make different presser feet that you can get for your machine that may have a little guide on it or a hinge that allows you to scoot your fabric right next to it, and it's going to give you a precise 1/4 inch seam. However, it assumes that your needle is in the exact center spot where it should be. But it's always a good idea before you start projects just to do a little test and see how your machine is handling. If you've hit a pin or something with a needle or broken a needle, it might get that center spot off just a little bit. So it's always a good idea to check it. And then I have another way here with some fabrics on how we can check it. I have 3 pieces of fabric. They're cut approximately 4.5 inches long, and they are all 1.5 inches wide. So I am going to take 2 and line them up precisely along the edge, and I am going to stitch. Now I know that with this presser foot, my fabric hangs out a little bit, which is also exactly where this 1/4 inch line is. There's a groove on the stitch plate there. So I'm going to go right next to that line on the stitch plate is where the edge of my fabric is going. Okay. And then I'm just going to do a quick finger press just to kind of make sure that seam is rolled all the way back. And there you can see, now we could check that to see. That looks like it's a 1/4 inch. There's where the 1/4 inch line is, and the line of my stitching is right at the edge of that stitch line. But we're going to have a more precise way here. So I'm going to take another piece and sew it to this little group as well. And again, I'm going to line it up with that edge there. Now this particular mat has lines on it. It is a like self stick. It just adheres itself, but you can reuse it over and over again. And I line up the center line with where my needle is, and then it shows here's a 1/4 inch line right here, which is also in line with that groove that I follow along. So I have an actual guide all the way down this whole piece of fabric as to where the 1/4 inch seam will be. Another thing you can do is I'm just going to lift this up and slide it out of the way. I have this piece of tape on here, and it's the same thing. It's a piece of washi tape, and it has the center line mark, so I just line that up right in place of the needle, and then it shows me a 1/4 inch on the black line here. So that works as well. I just happen to like this sticky mat that has the markings on it, and so we'll put that back in place. And then I've lined my edges up, and I'm going to go ahead and stitch with my fabric next to that line there. Okay, and so I have that stitched, and then I'm going to roll that back really nicely, and we're going to check the seam. Now, a 1/4 inch seam allowance off of 1.5 inches here on both sides, this piece should now measure 1 inch. So if we had our 1/4 inch seam exactly where we needed it to be, it should measure 1 inch. So let's get our ruler, and I'm just going to kind of hold this up here and place those seams right on the lines of my ruler. And if you can see, there is just a tick hanging over, so it's not quite measuring 1 inch. So my 1/4 inch seam then is too big. And some of that is because I have starched my fabric, so it's very, very thick. And that is part of your seam allowance, is that when you fold it over and press it, this little, fold, that's part of your seam allowance. Also, your thread is part of your seam allowance. So because I took an exact 1/4 inch seam on my machine, when I folded it, it's a little too small. So I'm going to kind of need to do a little bit more of a scant 1/4 inch seam. So let's get some more fabrics and we'll try it again. Okay, I got some new pieces of fabric cut, and they're 1/4 inch wide, and so we're just going to go ahead and line those up and stitch along there. And this time I'm going to go a little bit more along the edge of my foot, because I know that I took it was too much of a seam with the thread and the fold of the fabric. So I'm going to work my way in a little bit, so now that I'm right along the edge of my presser foot. Okay, and then I'm just going to roll that back, and we're going to put this one on and get those lined up. Good. That's not quite lining up. All right, there we go. And again, I'm going to do just a little bit less. Okay, and then I'm going to roll that one back. And I'm going to do the same with this. Okay. And I didn't really press it with an iron. That would make a difference too, but let's just kind of see where we're at real quick here. Okay. So here, when I put the lines on the ruler, they fall right on that seam. And the most important thing with a 1/4 inch seam is that the piece that you're sewing comes out the size it needs to be. It's not so much that your seam allowance inside here measures exactly a 1/4 inch. It's more of how the size of your piece here, because it's hard to take into consideration that fold and your threads in there. So when I do a little bit less on my presser foot, if I follow a little bit less than the 1/4 inch, when I measure my piece, it's now going to measure exactly the size that I need it to be. So just because you think you're doing a good 1/4 inch seam, it is a good idea to do a little bit of a test like that just to see where you're at. Each machine is different. Now this machine threads from the side of the needle, and so my thread goes into the needle this way. So I believe that has a little bit of a change in my 1/4 inch seam too, is that my thread is not going from the front where it's exactly on the center. It might be a little bit to the side, and then I have to shift my fabric over a little bit. So that could be one reason why this one likes to go a little bit less than the 1/4 inch. Also, maybe my needle is not exactly centered. You know, there's a little bit of wiggle room in there, but that would be something that your technician could look at. But those are some different things to think about when you're looking at a 1/4 inch seam. And if you ever wonder why, you know, your cutting is good and you've sewed your block, but it didn't come out to the size that it's supposed to be, that may have something to do with it. So go ahead and do a little practice like that. Again, I have 3 pieces that are 1.5 inch cut. Sew your seams and measure. Now this middle piece then should be exactly 1 inch. So that is what we're striving for when we are getting the good 1/4 inch seam, so that our blocks come out the size that they need to be. So that may be something to take a look at. Go ahead and do some of those steps, some of those tests. You can, you know, definitely see what the sweet spot is on your machine for getting your 1/4 inch. These guides are very helpful as well. Just whatever you need to do to help you get a consistent, nice 1/4 inch seam is, you know, the main goal of our quilt piecing. So I hope you found some tips here, and go ahead and check that 1/4 inch seam and see how you're doing. Thank you.